Welcome back to another episode of The Infinite Jungle. Today I am here with Nick Johnson, the founder and lead developer at Ethereum Name Service. We are going to be talking about the crypto user experience, its pitfalls, and its promises. But before we get started with the show today, here is a quick disclaimer. I need to remind you to please refer to the disclaimer linked in the podcast show notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice, an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy Digital or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Hi, Nick. Thanks for joining me on the show today on the Infinite Jungle Show.
Pleasure to be here.
I just want to note that you have a lovely background and I love what you are wearing to the show.
Oh, thank you very much.
Do you want to describe it for people who are listening and not like watching the show? Because it's a unique, get up.
Yeah, so I guess my background is my home office, and I have a bookshelf decorated with a range of objects from the Diva Award we won in at DevCon to puzzle boxes and random soft toys deposited by my daughter. I'm wearing, for anyone listening, the same thing I wore previously in a notorious appearance where it looked like I was wearing a vampire cape. The subtle difference is now I actually am wearing a vampire cape.
And this vampire cape, did you just get it off of like a Halloween store that's open like 365 like all year round? Because there are Halloween stores like that, and it's usually
That's true. No, so I when we were in Shanghai for DevCon Shanghai, I went with some friends to the tailoring district and had a suit made, which I eventually wore for my wedding. And I got back in touch with the same tailor, and I gave them the ridiculous request of an ENS vampire cape. So it actually has our logo on the back.
Oh, so the vampire cape is representative of ENS.
It is. It is possibly the silliest thing they've ever been asked to tailor, but never mind.
Okay, that's great, because I do want to talk about ENS and all the things that ENS is doing. For some of our listeners who have never heard of ENS, ENS helps users create these human-readable aliases for their blockchain addresses. It's a tool that tries to make crypto a lot more user-friendly for people who, don't want to memorize or interact with like a string of random numbers and characters. They can alias that blockchain address and then be able to send user transactions from like nick.eth or christine.eth. And I think people have been using this for quite a while now. But one of the things that I really want to spend a lot of this show talking about is the trade-offs that come with making the crypto user experience a lot more accessible to people. Because some of the concerns is that when you make the crypto user experience a lot more accessible, you have to make trade-offs in terms of privacy and security. And Nick being the founder, you being the founder and the creator of ENS, over the years, tell me about what are some of the trade-offs that you think you've had to make in building the ENS product, and what are some of the learnings that you've had on making crypto UX a lot more accessible over the years?
I think there's a lot of user trade-offs in developing ENS as a platform itself, and a lot of those focus on making that decision between building a simple, technically straightforward platform that is therefore very easy to use, but it is also quite limited, and building a more flexible platform that necessarily has more complex user experience. And that's sort of a difficulty we've dealt with from day one, because we wanted to build a protocol that would last, and that meant not being just a simple lookup from a name, and a flat namespace to a single address. And, I think ENS's history has shown that it wouldn't have gotten very far if it was quite that simple. The usability difficulties that come from the more complex system are largely ones that we've had to improve and iterate on by better user experience and better management interfaces and better best practices. More flexible system doesn't necessarily have to be more complicated for the user, because a lot of that complexity and a lot of that, anything unintuitive, anything sort of sophisticated that the average user maybe doesn't need to use directly can be hidden away in the plumbing, and the porcelain, so to speak, can be neat and tidy. So that's always been our focus. I
Hmm.
think in the wider, Ethereum and crypto space, these trade-offs exist as well. And I guess I would sort of start by looking at what I see as sort of the false trade-offs, because a lot of people look at, oh, you've named your account, therefore it's less private, which I think is actually a bit of a false trade-off, because people falsely assume that if they haven't named their account, they do have some degree of privacy. And I think that's mostly mythical. It does make someone's job a little bit easier to go to my account and see that it's named nick.eth, but it wouldn't be terribly difficult to figure out that that was my account, even without me having named it, because our activities identify us. And the fundamental thing you're accepting when you transact on a public blockchain like Ethereum is that your transactions are public. And unless you go to lengths, then there's going to be a fairly easy path to identifying who you are. So I think to a degree, ENS sort of removes that safety blanket of feeling like you're anonymous, but it does so by basically exposing that you weren't in the first place. And I think
Hmm.
fixing this is going to require a lot more innovations at the base layer and crypto UX, via smart contracts, than it is just something that ENS alone can try and do.
Yeah, and one of the kind of wins I think that is upcoming for improving the user experience on Ethereum, especially from the protocol layer up, is Ethereum core developers recently decided to include EIP 3074 into the next upgrade, which introduces these opcodes, these new operations on Ethereum, where you can delegate control of your account to a smart contract. Before we kind of get into um, the trade-offs again, but also like the dynamics between improving the crypto user experience through third-party services like ENS versus like in protocol changes to Ethereum that change like the structure of how these accounts work. Nick, can you give a little bit of a background for our listeners on your involvement with Ethereum protocol development before you started ENS, and then kind of like share a little bit of your story, like moving from Ethereum protocol development to founding ENS?
Sure, yeah. So I joined Ethereum in 2016. I started out by doing some work in writing Solidity libraries and so on. And in fact, I wrote a string manipulation library that is still sort of used out there today, although it honestly probably shouldn't be. Um, and very quickly got contacted by the Ethereum Foundation, who were sort of, would I like to come work on Ethereum, either on Go Ethereum or on Swarm or something else? Which took me a little by surprise. I was in quite a comfortable job at Google at the time, and I sort of somewhat enjoyed my job, but I was also like super engaged with this Ethereum thing. So it had really sort of caught my interest in a big way, and so I sort of took the plunge, going from employee to contractor, and giving up a lot of salary and so on, and the comfort of a steady job in order to give this a try, basically,
Mm.
and continued to love it. My work at the Ethereum Foundation was initially on the Swarm team, and in fact, that was when I started working on ENS, because I had basically from day one working on Ethereum sort of seen the need for a naming platform and for better UX.
Hmm.
And my work in the Swarm team demonstrated that they needed it as well, in order for them to name the content they were uploading. So I
And
sort
what
of
is
started.
Swarm?
Swarm is a decentralized content store similar to IPFS.
Mm. Is that kind of
Uh,
like the portal network that developers are working on now?
I'm not actually overly familiar with Portal. Swarm is in many ways very similar to IPFS. It has
Mm.
a different approach. It's not it doesn't rely on nodes replicating data in the same way, and it's pursuing sort of an incentivized structure similar to Filecoin. Um, but yeah, at the time, my focus was on I was working on the Swarm team, but quickly became sort of enamored of this proto ENS that I was working on, and I transferred over to the Go Ethereum team to work on the core client and
Mm.
kept, Proto ENS as a side project, basically. And while I was there, I was working on Go Ethereum on various performance improvements and features and so forth, uh, writing EIPs and acting as an EIP editor. I was the chief EIP editor for a period of time there, and the whole time sort of working on ENS in the background. And over time, that sort of took up more and more of my time to the point where the leadership at the EF went, clearly this is a project that needs more than one person. Uh, would you like to spin it out into its own organization? We'll give you a grant. You can hire some people. You can build it properly instead of part time, or by then it had basically become full time. And I said yes. And so they asked how much I would need. And I came back with a figure, and Vitalik doubled it, which in retrospect was very wise, because if I'd gone with the figure I proposed, we would have been out of business before we ever got anywhere.
Wait, how much was that? What
So
did
I
you
asked for
propose?
500K, and Vitalik suggested $1 million. And
Generous man.
yeah, and $1 million, was long enough for the core team to get ENS to fully launched and viable, and well past that, and to the point where we could actually get towards launching the ENS DAO and so forth, and then
What year
actually
was
allocating
that?
that revenue. The ENS DAO launched in 2021. ENS became its own project in, I want to say, 2018, but I need to double check that.
Gotcha. So 2016, starting off, leaving the golden handcuffs of Google, and then moving over to spinning it out with definitely the blessing and the support, though, of your teammates at the EF in 2018, and working on this project, the ENS project, and officially launching its decentralized governance structure in 2021. Have you come across, have you ever wanted since then to go back to protocol development and try and work on crypto user experience by changing the protocol of Ethereum? I mean, do you, from your work creating this service to make Ethereum addresses more accessible and usable, have you come across roadblocks, and have you come across kind of like limits to how much you can really do for the user experience if the EVM is the way that it is, if Ethereum is the way that it's structured? I mean, have you ever wanted to go back to being a protocol developer and just be like, this app stuff, it's really not working?
That's a really good question, and I do miss protocol development, at times, and I miss being an EIP editor and kind of the finger on the pulse that gives you of not just core protocol development, but also of standards, application level standards and so forth. And for a while there, I think I could probably have counted myself amongst the top people most familiar with not just the EVM but the whole Ethereum stack. And I still know the EVM inside and out, but I know I'm way behind on the state of the art now, and things have obviously moved on a lot without me. So I kind of miss it for purely selfish reasons as well. I enjoyed being up to date on that, and knowing everything that was going on in the tech stack. I think there are both usability and privacy improvements that could be done at the protocol layer. You mentioned, I think it's 3844. I'm probably misremembering the number.
Oh, the auth call ones,
Yeah,
the
auth call.
3074, yeah.
3744, yeah. And that's a good example of an enhancement that can potentially be, it's going to depend a lot on the UX that's built around it, because it can improve the UX enormously. It can also be a risk, in terms of, phishing, account compromise, and so forth. And it's going to be up to wallets and other applications to handle that extremely carefully, because we really don't want to open up new vectors for people's accounts to be, permanently and sneakily compromised. In terms of privacy, I think some of the best solutions have to happen at the protocol layer. We have excellent attempts at application layer privacy and so forth with things like Umbra Cache and so forth, but ultimately something enshrined at the consensus layer, like the way Zcash handles privacy, is going to be a lot more flexible and expressive. The unfortunate thing with both of those examples, of course, is that recently authorities have taken an extremely dim view of any attempt at financial privacy on the blockchain. And what I think is a significant overreach. I don't think it's unreasonable for people to want some degree of privacy over their financial affairs, but not everyone agrees. So I suspect that until that's a bit more resolved, that will be a sort of a radioactive area of blockchain development for many.
It's
So in terms of usability, things like 3744, uh, a naming enshrined at the base layer of the EVM would have been amazing, but that ship has definitely sailed. And I think at this point, it would be not just impractical, but probably undesirable to try and retrofit that. And I think we actually have a better system with the ENS built on top of it than we would if we tried to, even if we could get consensus for some sort of hard fork on it.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, to the point of privacy solutions being on Ethereum being difficult to work with. It's terrifying what has happened to the creators of Tornado Cash, of the crypto mixer protocol in Ethereum, and the charges that they're facing now. And I will say, though, that one good thing related to privacy that developers are prioritizing for Prague is BLS signatures. So there seems to be a little bit of movement on hopefully like cryptographic signature schemes on Ethereum that will allow for more privacy enhanced solutions and activities on Ethereum. Do you I mean, in terms of what you were talking about, of there being definitely improvements for the protocol that are coming, but so much of what you're building through ENS being sufficient, and ENS kind of evolving with the evolution of Ethereum. I want to talk a little bit about the way that ENS has changed over the years too. So Ethereum, one of the biggest changes I feel like in recent years is this change from being a monolithic chain to now wanting to be modular. And ENS, similarly, is not just a naming service for Ethereum addresses. It's a naming service for multiple blockchains and looking towards greater support for layer 2 rollups now. Can you talk a little bit about how crypto user experience, that paradigm is now changing from when ENS first started? It was really about, making the crypto user experience on Ethereum a lot more accessible. But now with the complexity of all these layers on top, these different chains, how does the product development roadmap for ENS change, and how has ENS evolved in terms of their thoughts in terms of your team's thoughts on really what does the crypto user experience really even look like when you may or may not be bridging assets from like 4 different protocols in one go?
Yeah, I think you raise an excellent point, because really, if anything, the overall change has just been more and more complexity. The EVM was never straightforward, but at least it was one chain with one address that represents an account and one sequence of transactions. Now you have multiple chains which are either independent or dependent, which may share the same VM, which may share the same addresses or not, and we have this increasingly complex landscape to navigate. And it's something where sort of we've been addressing directly in ENS with things like primary names for accounts. So sort of the reverse of regular resolution is that you can say this account is known as nick.eth as opposed to nick.eth resolves to this account. And so that's something we've had since day one, but now we have to deal with the fact of, well, what if your address is different on different chains? If you want nick.eth to refer to this on Ethereum and this on Optimism. So both your forward resolution, resolving the name to the account, and your reverse resolution, resolving the account back to the name, have to be flexible on a per chain basis. And that's particularly relevant when you've got a contract account, because we can't, most EVM compatible chains, you can expect that people will have the same set of EOAs across them, but we can't at all expect that those chains will all have the same contracts at the same addresses. So, how do we deal with that? And how do we then make sure that people who actually are using EOAs don't have to claim their account over and over again on every roll-up instance that they interact with? And so, we have solutions for these around setting, default primary names and default resolutions for EOAs and so forth, but they're not perfect and they're not, zero complexity. And so I guess it's an ongoing issue, and it's going to be something that I think is going to be the solutions are going to be more obvious as the space matures more. At the moment we have this sort of Cambrian explosion of rollups and of alternate platforms, and some of them are going to do extremely well, and some of them are going to become sort of Betamax. Aging myself with that comparison, but
I don't even know what that is.
exactly,
But that's
exactly.
okay.
Some of them are going to be DVDs, and some of them are going to be some of them are going to be Blu-ray, and some of them are going to be HD DVDs.
I see, I see.
Yeah.
I'm picking up what you're putting down. I'm a millennial, so at least I understand that comparison.
And there'll be people listening who are over 18 who that doesn't mean anything to as well. um, so we don't have a magic solution except to keep sort of tackling the problems as they come up, and it's such an evolving area. And I think that's sort of the story of ENS as well. We initially focused on, well, ENS is a way to have a name that resolves to an Ethereum address, and then we went, and decentralized content and text records that describe your profile, and also reverse resolution, which lets apps identify who this account is, and profile pictures, and on, and that's sort of us adapting to what ENS is really useful for, and making sure we do more of that effectively.
Okay, so final question based on this increasing complexity that is coming into ENS, because what it's trying to solve in the crypto user experience is also becoming more complex with the way that the Ethereum ecosystem is changing. Um, let's talk just very briefly about governance for ENS now moving forward, because Ethereum, I think, is very dead set. The Ethereum protocol is pretty dead set on the fact that it will continue to upgrade. There are a lot more ambitious things on the roadmap to continue to do, and that requires a certain level of coordination and centralization and really, project management that needs to happen to achieve this roadmap. And I'm wondering, Nick, from your perspective on ENS and now its development roadmap moving forward, and the fact that it's set up this DAO, now you have a token, and there's people that can vote on the way that the ENS protocol evolves. Tell me a little bit about the challenges that you foresee to coordinating all of these changes, to achieving all of these goals, and then one day to be able to hopefully have a service that can run independently of like human intervention, of such like a high level of coordination and such a high level of centralization too. It sounds from what you've said like we're very far away from that vision just because of how we're very early on in the stages of evolution. But I'd love to get your take, really based on your experience like building the ENS protocol, but also based on your time working on the Ethereum protocol too. What are some of the challenges to governance, and what are some of the challenges to coordination in building a decentralized service and product like the ENS?
Yeah, I think how to decentralize governance, and actually mostly how to remove governance, is one of the big difficult things to tackle in this space. And ENS's approach has definitely been one of gradual decentralization. And I think that term has often been slandered because often it means never. And I think ENS has done a good job of demonstrating that it's actually achievable. We've always aimed to minimize our dependency on humans, and to make the system as autonomous as possible. But there are always going to be things that need some degree of oversight. And so, starting at the beginning, we had a multi-sig, which was comprised of not of individuals within the team, which is, sort of the usual standard practice, but of actual, independent community members. And we expected and asked them to, seriously audit and consider any proposed upgrades or changes, not just, is this a legitimate request, from the person who says that, that Nick is asking it and he's the one who he says he is, but is this good for the ENS protocol? The sort of the goal of most multi-sigs is just to prevent credentials being stolen and to ensure that accounts can't be compromise the entire platform. But in this case, we wanted a higher standard of accountability even from the beginning. And over time, we've worked to decentralize that a lot further. Initially, with locking the .eth registrar, which means that basically .eth names can't be reassigned or reclaimed or anything like that, even with like any conceivable action of first the key holders and then the DAO. Those controls are actually permanently locked out now, and that was a really important sort of critical step along the road to decentralization for ENS. And then the next obvious step was launching the DAO and actually giving the governance power over upgrades and so forth to a wider number of people. And there are sort of two main reasons for the DAO to exist. One is protocol upgrades and improvements, and although I think the pace of those may decrease over time, no static system survives forever in my mind. Even DNS, which was created in the 1970s, continues to have enhancements and improvements in order to stay relevant, in order to continue to function, as desired. And I think that juggling the need to do that with the need to provide certainty over how it operates is a delicate task, and we've always tried to do that by limiting power in any area we can see that the potential for abuse is higher than the potential for correct use for enhancement, by doing things like locking down .eth registration rules while still allowing things like pricing to be adjusted by the DAO, because that ultimately depends on an external oracle and can't be locked in for all time. The second reason for needing governance is the protocol generates revenue, and that needs to be allocated somehow. And we could burn it all, but that seems like a waste, especially given that the people who are developing ENS need to pay to put roofs over their heads and internet connections and all those sort of things. So the DAO's other responsibility is to determine how to allocate and also how to invest those funds to ensure the long-term viability of ENS. One thing I would call out a little bit is I hear a lot this conflation of coordination and centralization, and I think it kind of comes from Bitcoin, really, my theory at least, because Bitcoiners can't really agree on anything, and that must be a virtue, goes the theory, and therefore it's a virtue because it means that by not being able to agree on anything, we can't change anything, and therefore everything is safe from manipulation. But I would say that the ability for a bunch of people to agree on changing a thing is not in itself centralization. If you're truly centralized, you don't need to get people to agree. You can just push a change through. If you need to get consensus from a large number of stakeholders and get their informed approval for something, then what you actually have is decentralized governance.
That's fair. That's an interesting point. I will say that coordination between a very large, increasing number of ecosystem participants gets increasingly more difficult. But if you notice that coordination is still happening at the same pace, in the same ways, even as an ecosystem is growing, you have to wonder who really is, making all the shots, and why are these decisions still like as easy as ever to kind of move through. But I also hear you that there are ways to make coordination a lot more transparent and a lot more accessible to a large number of participants. That doesn't necessarily need to slow down coordination. For example, the DAO is another kind of major entity or a type of technology that is really trying to make coordination, decentralized coordination, a reality, even for a large number of participants. But I think it does come with, it is a very experimental technology, and I think there's still quite a lot of concerns about whether or not coordination through DAOs, through token holder governance, really is effective and decentralized, and definitely a ton of concerns also around regulatory concerns around all of this and this development. But still, it's really interesting to hear the kind of work that ENS is doing around governance to make sure that ENS is a sustainable protocol and is here for the long run, instead of just, in and out, make a quick buck and then move on to something else, which is also a lot of what goes on in the crypto space.
Absolutely. Unfortunately true. And it is encouraging to see other organizations like Optimism sort of set themselves up as explicitly non-profits and for the public good. And it's intuitively you look at the foundations of crypto platforms and you would think that they would almost exclusively be involved in sort of almost a sort of a crypto libertarian mindset of, you know, we just build the things that are useful to us and everyone else can figure it out. But there's a really encouraging thread of so many people who want to build legitimate public goods and find sustainable ways to fund them through crypto rather than just building a platform to extract the most value.
Yeah, that really is the revolutionary part of what crypto does, that unfortunately is also the hardest to achieve. But yeah, well, this has been a really fascinating conversation, Nick. Thank you so much for joining me on the Infinite Jungle Pod.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having
And
me.
And thank you so much to everyone who listened to today's episode of Infinite Jungle. If you liked what you were hearing, and if you liked the episode, please be sure to like and subscribe to the show if you haven't already. That's it for today, but we'll be back with new episodes of Infinite Jungle next week. So be sure to tune in. But until then, to all of my jungle explorers, stay safe and stay curious.